Okay, to start with Phillips curve and natural rate of unemployment and inflation, we know that the natural rate of unemployment come from there is no cyclical unemployment, and the meaning of cyclical unemployment, which means there is no shocks that release a lot of unemployment people. Today, we're going to have a very interesting relations between what we call it the Phillips relation, and we're going to look for what will be the expected inflation and what will be the unemployment. What is the normal of Phillips relation? Who is Phillips and what is this relation and how they validate this relation later. So the first two people who introduced for us the Phillips relation, or to the negative relation between inflation and unemployment, which means that when we increase money supply, which is usually coming from the relation of increasing money supply. So if I write like that, if I increase money supply, we start by writing increase money supply. The increase of money supply will lead to inflation. So this is normally, so the prices goes up, prices goes up. This is the first point. And then we will find at the same time unemployment, what happened to it, then unemployment will decrease. So this is the meaning of the negative relation that exists. So this is what Phillips find. He find that printing money, increase of money supply, the growth of money supply, the increased availability of money and liquidity in any country leads to prices increase in price because the people will have more money. Why we have this? Imagine that we are in a country, and this country, let's say, for example, the total money supply country, money supply, this is very, very, very important. Money supply is 1,000, okay? And let's say that Adham is having only $100 in this market. He put only $100 in this country. So what is the portion of Adham from the total money supply? He have only 10%. Okay. So imagine that Hassan, the owner of the CB, the central bank of the country X, he increased the money supply, increase the money supply by 1,000. Okay, so the total money supply, how much? Total money supply is 2,000. Okay, so what happened? Unfortunately, Adham share decreases. Why? Because now Adham percentage will be 5%. And this means that his purchasing power, okay, purchasing power, what happened to it? Decreases. Is it good or bad? His purchasing power decreases, and this means that he will buy less, and this is justify why we have an inflation, because the production does not increase at that time. So this is why we have an inflation when we print money. Printing money, because we print money, all of a sudden, the price level increases in the market, and unfortunately, we didn't utilize this money, we didn't allocate it for production. This is what we call it the negative relation of Phillips. Okay, so when we go for the relation of Phillips, who started to introduce this relation? The first one who introduced this relation is someone called Edmund Phillips, and he found the negative relation between inflation and unemployment by recording all the observations. So he tracked all the observation, and he found all over the country, printing money increases, prices increases, and unemployment, what happened to it? Increases. So unemployment decreases, employment decreases. So this is the meaning of the negative relation. So prices increases and employment decreases. So this is the negative relation between both of them. Later, 2 years later, another two prominent researchers called Paul Samuelson and Robert Solow, he tried to investigate for this relation and become the central economic thinking. This is the core, how the monetary policy is effective. Do the monetary policies usually effective? Let's see what is this relation. So what they did, they tried to figure out the relation between unemployment. So what are these points and what are these? During the period from 1900 till 1960 in the United States, a low unemployment rate, the lowest unemployment rate was related usually with high rate of mean inflation. So, and a high unemployment rate was typically associated with a negative low or negative inflation. So this is track the negative relation. When we see this, what happened in this year, and these points represent the numbers of years. So this is the historical data tracking all the secondary data for the United States. And we find when we have very high inflation, what happened? Unemployment is very low. When we have very low rate of inflation, we have high rate of unemployment. This is the meaning of Phillips relation. So why they come from, where they bring this relation? It's come from wages. So let's go again back. Prices, inflation means price level. So what make the price level increases? Prices. Included inside the prices, we have something called wages, cost. So if I have a plenty of labor, many unemployment, so the wages is very limited. So consequently, if the wages decreases, the value of the wages decreases, then this means due to the high unemployment rate, and vice versa. If I have no unemployment, everyone is employed, I have a few numbers of population, so this means that the wages is increases. Okay, so this is represent the relation between the wage determination. How the wage, why we look for the wages? Because the wages will represent for me the cost. And if I take this cost and I add over it my margin, what do you mean by margin? My markup. What do you mean by markup? If let's say I'm going to produce a machine and this machine will take from me 100K. How much is the margin? How much I want to take over this cost? Let's say I want to take over this cost, let's say 5K. So this is what we call it. This call it markup. What do you mean by markup? I need 5K over the 100. So how much will be the prices? The prices for me will be equal 105K. So if the cost decreases, this is what reflects on the unemployment. As we see here, the wage determination is highly affected by the expected price level. And this expected price level, it is affected by the unemployment. What is this mu? This is called the unemployment. If unemployment is very high, then the wages is very low. This is what we call it, wage relation with respect to. Very interesting, very nice. If the unemployment here is high, positive, what happened? A lot of people in the market, many of me in the market, what happened? So this means that the wages will be very low. Why? Because this is what we call it nominal wage. So if I'm asking for office boy, so what happened of office boy? I have hundreds of thousands of people in office boy. So this is give me the power to give him low wages. And when I say that to people, that if you didn't develop your skill that much, your wages will be very limited. Why? Because I have a lot of substitute. Like if you have different skills and knowledge, blah, 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 then you will have an edge and you can increase your wages because you are not going to put in a segment where there is a plenty of you. You will be in a segment where are few of you. When there is a few of you, this means then you have a high wage. If you know a lot of skills, then you can have a high wage. This is the meaning of negative relation. What are other factors? Any other? The Z, all other factors. So this is the first point, the wage. What else? Price level, the prices in the market. How much of the prices is in the market? This is what we said. If I have, let's say, as I mentioned, 100K, this is 100K, the wages, let's say, for example, which is the cost, the W. So I want to add over it markup. What did the markup? The extra. Let's say 100K, I need over it 1.5. What is the 1.5? I need over 1.05, sorry. Which is because the 5 represent 5% from the 100K. So 1.05 times the 100, it will give me 105. This is the price level. This is the prices in the market. So the prices is highly determined on the wages. So this is why China has become very important. So in the future, if I want to determine the prices in the market, I want to go a country. So it is highly affected by the expected price level, which is depending on the markup and the unemployment rate. So this is how we can expect the prices in a certain market by using these three formulas. So assume that you want to look for the effect in the relation between the price level. So it is highly affected by the coefficients or the rate of change. How much the rate of change of unemployment is increasing or decreasing. This is the alpha. And in terms of inflation, we usually give the inflation the words by and the expected rate of inflation plus the markup plus the Z, which is the other catchable variables. So basically, if I want to make an expectation to the inflation, so the actual inflation, it is highly affected by the first one, expected inflation, the markup in the market, the percentage change of the unemployment. And as you see here, it is a negative relations between both of them. Okay, so this is the unemployment. So any increase in inflation, it is highly affected by unemployment. So I have a huge number of unemployment after COVID-19, huge number of unemployment, and the unemployment increases. This means that the cost will decreases, but due to other something called price rigidity. What do you mean by price rigidity? The relation vanished in 1970. All the relation was valid till 1960. This is important to know that the relation for the United States was valid, but in 1970, something changed. Do you know what happened in 1970s that make all the relation change and the relation is not valid and we didn't find it is working? It's something remind you what happened in 1970. I think this is the oil war. And the oil war, when there is a boycotting for the prices, and they are oil war in 1970, and then we stop supplying the oil for the other countries, this is reflect an increase in price level. So prices increases and the relation, they said it is not valid and it is not working. And we find that inflation versus the relation in unemployment, it become positive relation. And the relation disappeared. However, this relation is not disappeared because since 1970, there has been a negative relation between the unemployment rate and the United States because when they adjusted the increase of oil prices, the relation was negative, but when they adjust the effect of oil prices, they find the relation is valid. What do I mean by this? So this line, it is called the fitted scatter diagram. And recently in 1970, they provide us what we call it modified Phillips curve. What is the modified curve, Phillips curve? They adjust Phillips curves and they take this proof that any unemployment, it is highly affected by the markup and the rate of change. The rate of change between the actual and the expected inflation, it is related by negative change with the coefficient in addition to the markup. Simply, we can write that the rate of change of inflation by doing the differences between two types of inflation. So let's say, for example, the actual here is 10%, and this is the inflation, and the expected, let's say 9%. So this is the impact. Then I'm expecting that inflation is going to decrease. So it must be highly affected by this alpha, which is by consequently will be affected by the this year unemployment. Let's say this year unemployment is 9%. Minus something very important, which is the natural rate of unemployment. What is the natural rate of unemployment usually in developed countries? Usually in developed countries, it is 6%. Okay, so I can expect, or can I calculate the rate of change? I can calculate the expected inflation. I can estimate what happened in the future. So this is what we call it non-accelerating unemployment, when what we call it non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment, where UT, which is the expect or the coming unemployment, let's say, let's write it here. So the unemployment for a year, let's say we said that the unemployment for a year, it is 7%. It must be greater than the natural rate of unemployment, which we name it that it must be around 6%. And all this, then you can see that, which is reflecting or relating to the differences between the inflation and the previous inflation. So if inflation is 10% and this inflation must be less than the previous year inflation. So this relation represents the non-accelerating inflation rate, where the inflation rate that I'm looking for this year, that is highly affected by the natural rate of unemployment, which is also led by the inflation rate. So we try to relate the relation between the unemployment, the natural rate of unemployment, and the inflation rate. What Milton Friedman did achievement, and he argued with Edmund Phillips that the trade-off between inflation and unemployment in 1960 was an illusion. Accordingly, Phillips curve is a temporary rather than a permanent trade-off between inflation and unemployment, and thus come not from inflation per se, but from a rise of inflation rate, which results in unanticipated inflation. So all the changes is depending on your anticipating of your inflation. All the changes is not usually that they are negative relation, but it is the expectation of inflation. It is not usually because this is positive, the other one will be negative, but what I am expecting, maybe I'm expecting inflation increases, I put an assumption it will be increases, then this is what we call it anticipated inflation. What my expected price level will be in the future. And this what they took a Nobel Prizes for it. So the summary for the relation between unemployment and inflation in the United States is well captured by the relation of inflation and the deviation of unemployment. And when the unemployment rate is above the natural rate we said in the developing country is 6%. When it is above it, then inflation rate topically will reflect by the direction. Sometimes in France, for example, we have something called labor market rigidity, that the price of wages, they are rigid, they are not changing. When we have a price rigidity, this relation is not valid. So what are the labor market rigidity? Labor market rigidity in the communist systems, or let's say in the government intervention in the insurance or protecting the employment or the minimum wages or the bargaining power, they keep, let's say, Hassan wage at that much, or they are putting a huge support. And unemployment was not always very high in Europe, but it is very high in developing countries. In developing countries, we don't have that much of rigidity because the wage levels is very low. But in the European countries, the wage levels is stable. Some European country actually had a low rate of unemployment, but this is pre the start of the crisis. If you see here, this is the data for 15 European countries. You will find here the unemployment rate in the United States, despite it have a high rigidity prices, but the unemployment rate was the highest in France. And this is not due to anything except they have a high migrants, and these migrants are finding a hard way to find a job there. The lowest is in Denmark and Luxembourg, other countries. So what are the possible explanation of the decrease of the United States natural rate of unemployment from 7 to 8% in the 1980s to the 5%? What the American did? What are the recipe they use it? What are the things that they get benefit from it? How they succeeded in decreasing the unemployment to reach a 5%, and this was before the COVID for sure. So they start by attracting businesses. They start by attracting multinational corporation. They start by making the globalization work, and the foreign firms may have a lower markup, and the firms must have a lower markup. What do you mean by markup? The margin that they have it over the wages. And they did that by opening an agreement with the NAFTA, let's say, National North American Free Trade Agreement. They make agreement with the Mexican become a labor, and the labor is wages is very low, then the markup it is very low. So this is provide a high employment rate, especially by temporary agency there. Also, the aging of population and the decrease in the portion of young workers, this is help in the decreasing of unemployment. They do not have that much of unemployment, does not have much of unemployment from the youth because their fertility rate is low there, and the people who are participating is less. An increase in incarnation rate, as well as to the an increase in the number of disability. So to summary up, we have something called when the inflation rate become high, the terms of wage agreement tend to change with the level of inflation. It depends. I'm expecting inflation to be high. I'm expecting the price level to increase or not. So this will be highly adjusted with the wage agreement. We have something called wage indexation. What are the wage level? In countries like this, how much they take, and other countries, they are highly affected by the contract index and the actual price level. Also, the low inflation or deflation occurs, and this is the Phillips curve relation breaks down. One possible reason is reluctance of workers to cut their nominal wages. As you see here, it is highly affected as well by the wages in Portugal in times of high inflation and low inflation. In 1984, the inflation rate reached 27 in Portugal, and the distribution of wages was roughly symmetric. They are normally according to the wage change. So as you see here, this is the wage change, percentage of a change, and this is the percentage of change according to the numbers of years. So if you compare between the two figures between 1984 and 2012, you will find in 2012 the inflation rate was just 2%, and the distribution wages was bunched at zero. So they are distributed and they have nearly no negative wage changes. So by this case of the Portugal, we see that some countries succeeded to decrease the inflation rate. And how they decrease the inflation rate, they increase the production, they open the market, they attract a lot of businesses, they enter in European countries, and then they succeeded in joining the market. And this is the relations of Phillips curve. I wish you understood it, and it is very